separate them when you write specification. Since you can imagine immediately when you look to the resource layer, you can't make so many specifications and you are dependent on the repositories or whatsoever which are out there. I hope it's clear, right? So let's see what I have. Oh, the timeline. The timeline. So the idea is, so we talked about this, these specifications in 2 rounds now in the working groups, but I think we are not finished yet. So the hope is that at Christmas time we can come to a proposed a real release which is stable, but that's dependent on the community which will give comments or not. So that's our hope. So the old documents I showed you, they are kind of stabilized after many discussions. We need to make a consolidation round, so go back with the glossary we have, this consolidated glossary, and maybe change here and there or something and document the changes very well. And so that may be something we need to do for the old documents, but this full specification document is still out there for discussion, and I would like to invite you to look at this. Maybe not so much to the beginning part, which is again a lot of prose text, but maybe to the last part, the specifications, and make comments. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Sure. I think I stop also here. Yeah.
I have 3 questions, if I may. The first is the documents aren't available on the Fair Digital Object Forum website. Will you be making them available? The second is, will you be migrating to an environment like a GitHub or something like this where you can do issue tracking, and we can, as we do all the other specifications involved in? The third question is, I've read the FDO spec document, but there is no running concrete reference example throughout. Normally in a specification, you would expect to see a reference implementation that goes alongside the specification as a system to really explicate all the complications of what you're saying here. Is there a proposition that there'll be a reference implementation at the same time? It makes it a lot easier. Very complicated set of documents you have.
Let me start with the last point. So I didn't mention this here. What we also did was there are a couple of people, and we'll discuss this in the next session. There are a couple of people who are working on implementations, right? So at KIT in Karlsruhe, I saw Ulrich here, Rainer here, and in Rob's Center, and so forth. So a couple of people who are working, and what we miss, and that's something we will discuss after, is a big integrated, let me say, demonstrator. Yeah. Yeah.
When you go to the website and see those documents
Yeah.
there, because you're asking for help from the community.
Yes.
And but it's not easy to get to the documents.
So Tina, well, we discussed this at a certain moment in time in the groups in the steering committee, and we decided to use Google Drive, Google Docs, right? I don't have any personal opinion, but so we did.
I don't mind about the technology.
So we did. Yes. Carol. Yes. So the links. So we have this process, and the process says at a certain moment, the other way around. So the process document, if you look to it, it says, well, you know, there are first cycles in the working group. Then there are cycles in the FDO forum. So all the members who are in the working there. And then we said, look, at a certain moment, that's the proposed recommendation step. We go out to the community. So everyone who is registered via the website, FDO website, you have a registration button, and Tina maintains it. Everyone who is on that list gets the link. There's no secret about the links. You can also give it to other people, but that's the way we do it, right? So everyone who is on the list gets the email when we have this step of proposed recommendation. So it's out there as a Google Doc. And what we do, Tina, is, correct me if I'm wrong, what we do is we wait until the deadline for comments. Then some people look, the editors, authors, look into the document, try to resolve the comments. So I had a long discussion with Mario, for example, about some comments from him and Stian to resolve the comments. And then we create a new version, put the old document into an archive folder so that all the comments are still there. But you should not comment on the old documents, right? So then we tell everyone, here's a new version which you can comment on, and that's the way we do it. Tina, correct? Yes. I see two hands, Dimitris and Wouter.
On the topic, I think Carol is raising a very important topic, which is when is the right time to make that publicly available? And I think there we need to be a bit careful. When we reach the level of maturity that we believe is ready to be out there, because once it's out there without actually having a prescribed community that you can communicate the specifics around this, it becomes a bit risky. So we need to make sure that before we open it up to everyone has reached the level of maturity that we are happy with to be out there, even for wider consultation. And this is the reason why it's not publicly available on the website, but it's being distributed to people that we also can provide the context in which they can contribute to that consultation.
Yep.
That's an interesting proposition. I see where you're going, Dimitri. But of course, one has to, if you want to have it universally adopted,
Voted, or is that a good term? We send the links, right? There's no secret. And if people get this from a colleague, the link, well, fine, go ahead. Your second point, Carol, was what?
is related to the first point.
Oh.
Actually. It's all to do with the process.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with standard setting processes.
Right.
I've been involved in many.
Right.
And they have procedures to do with openness, engagement, community setting, ways of
Right.
clear protocols about how you can record what's going
Right.
on. That's why we have things like GitHub and so on. And this is a geeky thing, right? So it's not like people who are involved won't be used to using GitHub, for example.
Good.
So it's more or less a kind of an urge to, because I think it's important, we're going to get this really used, it has to be ubiquitous in order to really have the important value. That means we need to build community adoption. If we're going to do community
Absolutely.
adoption, we need to have community pathways and acceptance. And
Yeah,
that means
yeah.
we need to move to open engagement.
Yeah.
Even if it means sometimes people will say, ooh, you might
Yeah.
have done something a bit different.
Carol, so what you're saying is that as we do it at this moment, register, please, and then you are part of. You would say that's not sufficient.
That's not sufficient.
Good.
Not for
Clear.
triggering community engagement.
Clear message.
It gives the impression
Yeah.
of a clique. And
Yeah. Okay.
RTA's been very successful in this direction because it doesn't do that. It's
Yeah.
much more open.
Okay. I think we got your message, Carol, and we need to discuss this in the steering committee. And I'm always with you. I mean, I would it's me, not the steering committee, but it's me. I would always say, look, at the beginning, protect yourself. Since, you know, if you at the very, very beginning of the stage are getting from everywhere comments, you end nowhere. But at a certain moment, you have to make this drop. Yes, okay. Is there any, Paolo?
So if you want this on recording,
Du guckst auf die Uhr. So ein bisschen.
Many thanks. So I'd like to suggest to use, like in industrial processes, the term of moment of truth. At the moment we open documents, we can add a label and say, this is the moment of truth, and then the date. So this way it's possible then to create and to protect also.
Yeah, thank you, Paolo. So I could imagine, but we have to discuss this, that so we have a step proposed recommendation, which is already high, that after, say, the second version of proposed recommendation, we say, well, it's open now for everyone, or something like this, right? Then we don't have to turn around the whole process, but something like this. Yep. Okay. So how far are we in time?
2:15.
Which is?
We have to finish until 3.
Yes.
But
So
we don't have
Ulrich,
in
he is not there
no.
yet.
Ah, no, he's coming. I think he was listening
Yeah.
in the YouTube channel.
So is there any other questions? So I think it's not worth to go now into detail of all the specifications or so, since there are quite some. So it's better that you know where we are. It's good that, important that you know that we want to try. I mean, that's a challenge. We need to try technology kind of independent. So, which is also always a fight. Is, for example, signposting. Is that included in the specifications which we have or not? Right. So, well, I hope that Herbert participates somehow. Since you are at the source, but I was always looking at your stuff, right, and comparing, but I'm not the person who is now perfect in all what you wrote. So we always need to make sure that we are kind of, I say, technology independent, which is partly a hard game, for sure. So everyone who has access to these documents or interested to read these documents, please have a look and check, right? Herbert.
I would like to ask a clarification, Peter.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Herbert.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks. So a clarification,
Yep.
because I have a hard time reconciling the slide that was shown by Ulrich, the digital object slide, with something you said. So when I look at the digital object slide, I see a one-to-one correspondence between a digital object and a bit sequence. You were talking about granularity in quite a different way. You said, well, it is up to scientific communities to decide what the granularity of their digital objects is. So, meaning, I think you gave the example of one digital object that could contain 1,000-bit sequences. Well, then, in that case, the drawing of the digital object model is not correct, because it literally says 1 DO, 1-bit sequence.
Yes. Well, I think I see your point, Herbert. So let me give you an example from my own experience. That's always the best, right? So we had a lot of researchers out there, and these researchers created a lot of photos, videos, and so forth, right? And some decided, well, all my set of photos of one field trip is one digital object. And then they have kind of bundle, and they have, you know, that, and they have a lot of references to the individual photos, thousands of what, which is their decision, right? So at that moment, wait a moment, at that moment where you register a PID and say, this is my object, then you have to take care that you have a method to come from the PID to these thousands of photos. You could also say every of these 1,000 photos is a digital object. Well, then you have 1,000 PIDs. So is that clarifying or not?
No, I really understand.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say, I think, is that picture of the FDO is not correct, because it does not suggest a one-to-many relationship between the digital object and the bit sequence. It clearly suggests a one-to-one.
Well, that's the matter. Yeah, I think I see what you mean.
This
It's
is very important.
yeah, it's important.
Because in the previous work that was done by others, research objects, OAI, ORE, signposting, there is no such notion of a one-to-one between a digital object and one bit stream. So you
No,
can
no.
say what it is.
Yeah, I mean the bit stream habit could also be a container, right? So
No,
it could.
no.
Yes. So anyone else?
No, I think it's
Done.
pretty fundamental.
Yeah, it is.
Just a remark. I think Ulrich showed a diagram from the past here. I think in the meantime, we have, let's say,
Wir sind bei mit der Zeit.
Ulrich ist dran, also ist da, wir könnten das probieren, aber jetzt.
Ja.
I think see it as an historical start.
Okay.
Just one list. But you are
This old diagram. Yeah, yeah.
check for consistency.
So I'm very happy you say that, because this is really a truly fundamental thing. Because
Absolutely.
The consequence of this
Absolutely.
depiction is that you're going to end up with trillions of persistent identifiers which you're going to have to manage,
Oh,
which really is
no problem.
out of the question. No,
No problem, Herbert. No problem. We do. Not trillions, but some.
I think it's not the lasting consistency that we'll find if
Okay.
you compare all the diagrams.
pretty fundamental though.
Yeah. Well, I hope we can continue talking about these things, Herbert. But let's see. So, any other question at this moment? Yes. Thibaut, eh?
You showed a slide with the timeline, so I would be interesting what is going to happen between now and Christmas time. Where
So after this conference, I mean, we're all suffering from organizing the conference, but after this conference, we'll take a big breath and then start discussing again, and we will certainly send an email again to the registered folks to look at these documents. So the specification and Ulrich's documents, since these are the two, and the glossary, these are the three things which we now handle. So we will send an email again and say, look, please do. And then we'll wait another month for the first round and see what kinds of comments we received, and then do a next round. So start a new version with the authors and editors. So that's what we are going to do. And the hope is, of course, that we can stabilize until Christmas. We'll see. Is that? So, let's see whether Ulrich is there.
He's there.
Ulrich, are you well connected?
I hope so.
Good.
It's
Let's see that we get your slides on.
okay. So I need some feedback when you change the slide, and I'll say that I needed the next slide in that moment. So we have, and I've heard in this discussion already that some questions came up with this this old diagram from RDA and the one-to-one correspondence between digital object and bit sequence. Actually, this is the reason why we changed the dependencies in several of these descriptions from this old statement here or old diagram here into our diagram we develop. And I'll come to that in a moment. Next slide, goals. So what we need to achieve with this document actually. So FDOs essentially are about facilitating machine actions on digital objects, and what we need for this is a kind of a self-explaining structure for the metadata needed for operations. So behind all this are operations, and we will discuss also types of for operations later today. And I'll come to that also at the end, but only about some of the aspects. And what self-explaining means essentially is everything has to be machine readable. The whole way from the beginning into the machine understanding of what metadata is about and so on. And for this, we need an infrastructure. And we decided to describe this infrastructure with the following components: the attributes, types, which are a special kind of attributes, profiles, and registries. And the attributes need some way of definition. We need a way to make understandable what an attribute is and what the values for this attribute actually can be. And then we need to understand the shape of the, we call it FDO record or PID record in some contexts. And for this we need a profile, and also we need schemas for attribute definitions, all this kind of stuff. And then we go into the direction of governance to some extent, and also making things interoperable by explicit specification. So we need a kind of a configuration and governance process there. And then we have three additional goals. One is to collect all things which are already done in communities. There are a lot of local operations around, and they have a clear access for these local operations, which is not interoperable across the silos. And then we want to have a closer look how operations fit into this picture. And at the end, I'll talk a bit about a kind of, we call it genres. There are different concepts of FDOs, and they have different roles, and we have to understand what this might be. Furthermore, at that point, we are not finished. Obviously, this is certainly something we need to continue in the future. The next slide, please. General concept of a digital object again. So this is our view of that, what the outcome of RDA was. And you find here that, first of all, the digital object is an FDO, a fair digital object. But also there are two arrows from there to metadata and to the bit sequence. And we say here, these arrows are references which are given by attributes. So behind the FDO, we think there is an FDO record, so some kind of recording what the content of the FDO might be. And this record is described or is given by attributes. And as you can imagine, if you have a couple of attributes, it doesn't matter whether you have 2 or 20, or I wouldn't say trillions, but a huge number of attributes. And those can refer to a couple of metadata descriptions, but also a couple of bit sequences. So there is no one-to-one correspondence in this direction, and also in the other direction it doesn't exist, because a bit sequence can be also referred by another FDO. So this is essentially to this special question. I think it was Herbert who asked this question. And what you see here also is that the metadata essentially also has some structure. There must be a schema for that. And also the bit sequence might have a structure. And also this could be described by a schema, but usually there would be other instruments like that what we call then types to describe this structure in a way such that machines can understand how to work on these bit sequences. And also we skip here the collections, which is also in this old RDA picture. It's an important aspect, but it currently goes beyond the scope, and we have left it out here. I think Stein will have a more detailed view on this and the relations between collections and FDOs later in this session here. So what we have to look at closer is what's behind these attributes. And as I said, we have this FDO, which is essentially or has an FDO record, and in this FDO records there are a couple of attributes. And what we want to describe here is first of all, these attributes are key value pairs. So an attribute has a key and has a value. And then the idea, and this is something which is also in linked data concepts the case, also in the contexts for other metadata environments, usually the case. There is a definition for that what the key is, and this definition essentially constrains the value, the value space which is allowed for this this attribute. And that's the same idea. We need here a attribute definition, and an important point here is that we see this attribute definition again as an FDO. The key refers to this attribute definition by its PID. So because the attribute definition is an FDO, it also has an PID. And the key essentially can be used here as the PID of this attribute definition. And this way, via the attribute definition, we constrain the value of the attribute. And then these attribute definitions are stored obviously somewhere. We have registries for that. And then we also need to understand the FDO record structure itself. Because this is for a machine not obviously recognizable. And for this we invent the definition of an FDO profile, which to some extent actually is very similar to an attribute definition, because an FDO record also is a kind, if you want, a kind of an attribute. There is a record and there are sub attributes which are given by key value pairs. But we distinguish here because the attribute definitions are completely, and there is another group which is defining and governing these definitions, and it makes sense to make a distinction for this here. And I'll come to that also in a moment. And then we can go even further. We have said that we have these attribute definitions stored in a registry, but also we need a way to understand how these attribute definitions are built. And this is, again, there is a schema definition behind it. The schema definition again is an FDO and is again stored in some kind of a registry. We call it here schema repository. And the same then we have for the profile. And then the next step then is because the attribute definitions is to some extent in the realm of communities. Mainly, they will define what kind of attributes they need and how they should be described. The FDO profile is something which is more important and has a bigger and more important role for interoperability. And here we feel that the governance of FDO of the FDO forum needs to take place. There will be a couple of mandatory attributes. They are not currently not defined, but or specified, but it's clear that that certain attributes will be in there. This will be the step we will take during the next month to have there a FDO configuration, a governance process which controls that, and then we this way we can constrain the shape of an FDO more specifically. Yes, this is something which I didn't have mentioned before. Obviously, the PID of this FDO resolves to the FDO record. So the whatever the FDO record is, it can be a landing page, it can be a PID record, it can be something else. The PID should resolve to this FDO record. And then, as I said, we have these local operations already in place in several communities. They have a certain structure of their objects, and they know how to work with them. The idea here is to find a lightweight way to embrace all these work which was done before, and also with which will probably happen during the next years, that there is some kind of human readable and human understandable description of the shape of those objects, and there are already local operations. There is currently no way for generalized operations to find their way into these details because they are just human readable. But what we can give here is similar to MIME types. We can have a persistent and unique identifier for these structures, and this way we can provide access for operations to work with them across communities. The next step, of course, then would be that these structural informations which are currently given for humans are set up in a way such that also machines can understand that, can dig through it, and can find their way how to use the digital object itself at the end. But this is something which will take some time, certainly. Yeah, so we talked about local operations, but we also have in mind operations which are more global, which are given for everyone and are usable for a huge amount of different FDOs. And for this aspect, we need to have a kind of a relation between the operations and between certain attributes which are given by the FDO record. So the idea here, and we call these attributes, we call FDO type definitions, or these attribute definitions we call attributes, we call type definitions. And the idea here is that the operations should always, in some syntactical sense, should be able to work on FDOs if a certain set of FDO type definitions is given in the profile. So you can imagine, or it's perhaps the idea here is similar to what you find in functions and computer languages, where you have a function, and the function always works if a certain set of parameters is given in a certain way with certain types. And this is a similar idea here, but these types can be much more complicated, of course, and it can be not only primitive types, but hierarchical complex types which are given there. And then, as I said, these operations are stored in registries, and you can then query these registries if you have a given set of type definitions in an FDO record. You can query which operation is usable, and you get back a list of such operations, which is simple because this is all known by the registry. The question still is whether this list always gives back a semantically usable answer there. This is then something people have to decide, but it's already a huge amount of work which is done by the machines and not by humans to find out what operations are there which are usable. So we have quite a number of different aspects highlighted, and then we can put all these arrows together, and this gives a huge picture. And actually, the story was we have worked on this huge picture all the time, and Maggie was the one who always said, well, we need to make this understandable and to split it into pieces. But at the end, I think the discussion was better in the whole diagram, because we need to change the diagram at several points in time. But also we always had the big picture in mind, and could also draw relations from one end to the other end, which were important and useful. What we also made at the beginning, we made a decision on what is more or less in the governance realm of FDO forum, which is more or less in the governance realm of communities, and which is something where we have to struggle with both, probably. The blue part is this part, so there actually is a huge part where communities and FDO forum will have interactions, but there are also clear parts which are governance of FDO or governance of communities. Also, this is some kind of preliminary. We have to see how this develops in the future. There is another aspect. Many of these relations occur to be a relation that a certain thing is a FDO. As the attribute definition have said, the profile schema and so on, also the FDO configuration, all these are FDOs at the end. And it turns out that this is something which needs a special view. And this view is also given here. And this view is helpful because it shows that these FDOs and their records behind them are fulfilling different roles, and they belong to different concepts. So we have this FDO, which somehow refers to a bit sequence, which is the digital object we have in mind to describe, but also we have this FDO type or FDO attribute, which is itself again a FDO, and yeah, one can imagine that in some cases these are only given once. In other cases, they can be given multiple times. They have, as I said, different roles, and they are used in different contexts. And therefore, we also have drawn this picture where we look at one level at what are the FDOs there, and which kind of interdependencies they might have. Also in this document, next slide, sorry, the examples. We have two examples, one legacy one, which came from times far beyond even the RDA discussion, the DARIA use case, where we have used human readable keys and values which are fulfilling some kind of constraints. And these we can now, from this or in this framework, we can now make into FDOs by adding profiles, because these profiles exactly disambiguate and describe the human readable attributes or types used in this PID records there. And also we have the PID for instruments use case, where we have seen that we can use directly the PID as a structure and as the key for the value, and to implement complex, even not really deep complex, but hierarchical keys, values for certain keys into the PID record. We would like to have other use cases, of course, to fine-tune the implementation details. And also, of course, we would, these two use cases are based on PID records. It would be nice to have also use cases that go beyond that. For instance, use cases built up by landing pages in such a way so that it fulfills the needs of an FDO. But yeah, this is also something that has to be done in the next couple of months. Then I would like to have a short outlook. It's the relation between operations and types need to be better understood. We have discussed that in this presentation a bit, but there is much more we need to see, and also there will be a talk later this afternoon about this. And also you have seen these genres. This is currently only something we see, but we don't really understand, and therefore we need to really dig into this and make also find a deeper structure in there. Let's phrase it this way. Okay, so this was it from my side, and I thank you for the attention. And if you have any questions, yeah, perhaps now or later.
Yeah, thank you, Ulrich. This is certainly tough stuff. And as Ulrich said, we discussed it at length. These complicated diagrams Are there any direct questions? So we will continue and we will have workshops about these things. And since in such a meeting as today, we can only, how do you say, offer things that we need to discuss that in detail, continue to discuss that in detail. Are there direct questions to Ulrich? Herbert? Yep.
Thank you, Ulrich. I thought it was very interesting and clarifying, actually. My first comment is really a suggestion. I would very much love if you would put that FDO picture in those specifications, because it helps enormously to get rid of that one-to-one thing that we just talked about. Then I have a question. I think you mentioned that the PID resolves to the FDO record. And I was wondering whether that's really what you meant, or whether it would be safer to say that the PID somehow leads to the FDO record. And the reason I'm saying that is that would leave more implementation flexibility, thinking, for example, of the hundreds of millions of legacy objects that we currently have, whereby the PID resolves to landing pages. And unless we would put that FDO record somehow in that landing page, you know, that would not really, we couldn't turn these into FDOs. And then I'm going to ask my last question, and then you could respond. The operations bit sounds a lot like the behaviors from the Fedora repository architecture, if you're familiar with that. But I was surprised to see that here the behaviors are defined at the level of an FDO, meaning the entirety, where, if I remember correctly, in the Fedora architecture, they were defined at the level of the bit streams. So I kind of would like to hear your reasoning about that.
Yes. Yeah, the first question, I think this is certainly what we want to do. Currently, this is in a working document, draft document, which is living, but this should be finalized. I think we can also open the discussion inside FDO about this document in the next couple of days. And then we have a clear way how to bring this at the end into the specifications. And I completely agree. This diagram is a kind of a specification which is important to know for who are willing to understand what FDOs might be and how they can be used. Therefore, it's completely clear that this has to be part of the specification. The next question was about, perhaps I'll continue with the last question about the operations and the target of the operations itself. Whether it should be the bit sequence or the FDO. We decided to use the FDO because the operations also could work on the FDO record. And this is something which is important. If you want to have complex workflows and you use these operations in complex workflows, it's important that also the FDO record, so the representation of the bit sequence on the digital object level, that this also can be changed, can be worked on. There can be given results which are not immediately given by the FDO record. But there could be an operation step in between. And therefore, we think it's better to have it on that level and not on the pure bit sequence level. But finally, at some point in time in any workflow, you will get to the bit sequence and then work on that. And then perhaps just one reminder for the second question. Sorry?
Bit resolving to the FDO record?
Yeah. This is something which is important. We are referring here, and we from the PID world, we have a clear picture on that. But I think we will have we will need an intermediate step somehow to embrace all this legacy stuff we have currently. And I agree that for that, probably our view on PID resolving is not sufficient. I think we actually have to think about that and to find out how we can cover that as well. I see the point, and I think there will be solutions. Currently, I can't give a direct answer, but we will discuss this internally. Or if you want, you are, of course, you are always invited to help us here, to step in, to make suggestions. Thanks, Herbert.
Let me add one point, Herbert, to this, to your question about operations, right? So as Ulrich said, we are discussing that amongst ourselves. What is it? What are we talking about? So we will not have answers this in the next session, but questions, a lot of questions. And it would be nice to have you and others in that session, since I think we need to, after this conference, we need to start organizing workshops on certain topics. And one of the topics is the relationship between FDOs and operations. We're not, we're not sure that we really understand the game. So we will discuss that, and probably, but that's something we want to discuss in the next session, how to move ahead, right? How to move ahead. And my guess is at this moment that amongst others, we will organize, or you have to organize some workshops with good people on certain topics to go ahead and to better understand the game. Mario.
Ciao Ulrich. More than a question is a clarification. I had a difficulty to explain the difference between FDO record and metadata. In the sense, I try to say FDO record is the implementation. Metadata is something that in some sense we don't care. Is correct?
Ulrich, I guess you will start or so.
I must confess I didn't get the question. It was
the question is, I hope Mario correct. So we are talking about the PID record, which contains metadata in a certain sense, and we talk about, let me say it, community metadata, whatever we call it. So, and that metadata can include rights, can include the typical descriptive metadata, provenance, whatever you have. So, what is the difference between the PID record metadata and the other metadata? Correct? Good.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I can answer that. In some sense, it's again a community definition, because the community will decide which metadata is more important and which metadata is more in the background. The reason behind this is that we see that the resolving to the and I say here again, resolving to the FDO record is something which is given immediately. In some sense, it's, if you want, the similar, or there is a similarity to the MIME types. You already know what's in there if you have the reference. And this is the idea of the FDO record from those which are looking at from the PID side. this means that, so I see Peter is not amused. Well, yeah, so this means that, that there will be metadata which needs to be immediately available or very fast available, and other metadata where it might be necessary or might be okay if you have different resolution steps in between. And in this situation, usually as a community who wants to present their digital objects, they decide what are the interesting discriminants between different of their digital objects, and what are the processes to actually distinguish them. And then they say, well, this kind of attribute is interesting for us, and this kind is not that interesting, but it belongs to the object, so it should be in another level of reference from the reference point of view.
Has a point.
So I see it a tiny bit different. I mean, he's correct, of course, but I see it a little bit different. So the metadata for me is the descriptive, like the descriptive metadata, the rights metadata, the provenance, etc. Whereas I see the other as expressing the class of the digital object. So to which class does this object belong? And for that, I basically need a URI to say what the class is. And that URI, that should resolve to a document that describes the class. But if I'm a client who has many times before seen that class URI, then I don't even need to resolve to that document. And I think what I'm doing here is giving another argument why the PID should not really resolve to the FDO record. It should just, we should be able to express to which class does this object belong by means of a URI. If I've never seen this URI before, then I'm resolving to it. And if I've seen that URI before, I don't resolve, I just know what's in there.
So thanks. So that's
yeah,
what Ulrich tried to express with the types, right? So if you want to be fast, look at the type, and that brings you somewhere. But that's the same kind of argument. The point is to add this here, when we discussed it at length, of course, right? And it will be continuous discussion. And we said there will be mandatory attributes such as the profile, the link to the profile. If you don't have the link to the profile, you don't know, the machine doesn't know what it gets. So that must be mandatory. I think we had one other mandatory point, which I can't recall at this moment. And then we said, well, there is some interoperability between, or not, there are some common things like checksum, which you might want to immediately check. You don't have, but you might want. So we call these optional things, which are common across many disciplines. You could use them as a repository, but you don't have to, since they're optional. And then we say, well, as Ulrich tried to explain, there are many people who want to add something based on community decisions. Who are we to say no? So we have in RDA, that goes back to RDA discussions, as Rebecca might know, where we discussed this the same also with Keith and so forth, right? Where people say, no, I want community people. No, we want that to have it there, point. Well, who are you to say no? The only thing I think which we have to say is, and that comes a bit to what Herbert said, we have to make sure that they are registered nicely, which is not under our control, but that, like the Biomed people, they have this nice registry, which is out there. I forgot the name, EDAM, blah, 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 where they declared the ontology. EDAM, sorry. Yeah, so where they declared, I look at this nicely to what their categories are and so forth, right? So if it's done nicely, that machines can do something with it, that's fine. We didn't yet resolve that issue, to be honest, right? Yeah. Time.
We are done. No?
We're at the end.
Yeah.
So again, before I hand over to Ivonne, so this is probably hard stuff. So again, thanks Ulrich, hard stuff, and we will discuss it in a moment how to move ahead. Probably we should have another workshop or so on these issues, since it's tough stuff, to invite some people, from different backgrounds, right? If Herbert is agreeing to come to such a workshop, well, we would invite him, of course, right? So probably that's the way to go. So please have a look if you're interested to these documents. It's hard stuff, and contribute.